Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
A note to listeners. The following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
A witness recanting their story could be because they weren't an eyewitness, or it could be because they were an eyewitness. Now they're fearful of their life, or it could have been that they were threatened in some manner. She certainly sounds like somebody that needs to be re-interviewed about what she was told. They should really go back and talk to her again. You have to look at why is that person coming forward to you with this information. You have to listen to the concerns that they have for their safety and why is it that they feel that way.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
This case has been challenging on so many levels from the very beginning. After 9 years, there is still a ridiculous amount of questions to be answered. What happened that night on July 8th, 2013? Who killed Molly and Colt? Was it one person that killed them, or was it a group of people? Were the killers friends of Molly and Colt, or strangers? Where are their bodies? Who knows what happened to them? And who helped dispose of their remains? Are there any remains left?
As far as we know now, the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation is still actively looking into this case, according to our sources. But are they getting any closer to a resolution to these awful murders? To get some law enforcement perspective, we reached out to a longtime associate who was the commander of the U.S. Marshals. He referred us to a colleague who recently retired as a homicide detective in New York.
Pat Portela has years of experience working as a homicide detective. He has worked many high-profile homicide cases, including the infamous Gilgo Beach Serial killer case, which is still unsolved after 12 years. Pat is here to give us his take on what a difficult homicide case looks like from the inside out, and we're happy to have his expertise.
Well, listen, Pat, thank you very much for coming on today and kind of helping us out, kind of sort through some of the law enforcement questions that we have in regards to this case. What we wanted to talk to you today about, and before we even get into that, I'd love for you to kind of give us like a thumbnail sketch on your career and your expertise as a homicide detective and how long you've done it and what are some of the kind of the cases that you've worked on in the past, that kind of thing. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of enlightening us on your career.
Sure. Was in law enforcement for 38 years. Started out in New York City, worked in Harlem, was in the 7-5 in East New York. Came out to Suffolk County in 1987. Worked in the 1st Precinct, town of Babylon, double car in Amityville. Went to plain clothes. From there, made detective. Then in 2000, I interviewed in homicide and was accepted as a member of the homicide squad. Remained there for about 20 years as a homicide detective. Worked on the Ted Ammon case, which was Ted Ammon was a financier who was killed out in his East Hampton home. An arrest was made by an individual by the name of Danny Pelosi. Worked on numerous murder cases where I was the lead detective, as well as assisted on countless murder cases. In addition to that, the homicide squad is responsible for all deaths in the county of Suffolk, the western towns. And so we did overdoses, suicides, as well as accidental deaths. So I've done countless death investigations, countless murder investigations. I was also part of the Gilgo Beach serial murder case investigation. So that's what I did, and I retired in March of this year.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you for your service.
Absolutely. That's amazing career you've had. And thank you for speaking with us about this, because we really want someone like yourself who has so much experience with these things to kind of help us understand how this case is laying out with the witnesses and why we haven't been able to really get any traction for the past 9 years, even though there's so much what we think is circumstantial evidence and even possible witness testimony that could maybe prove for conviction.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that Cindy hit the nail on the head there. The biggest thing that, and we spoke a little bit on the phone the other day about this, is that this area in southeastern Oklahoma has a methamphetamine problem. A lot of the people that are involved in this case have either are using meth or have used meth or are dealing meth, are in that community. And a lot of the witnesses that have come forward, or people who say they have known something, have used or are using or are recovering from methamphetamine and or drugs. So can you speak a little bit to about, and some of them are informants, some of them are anonymous. Can you speak a little bit about when you're dealing with crimes like homicide or any kind of crimes, how when you're doing a homicide investigation or investigation in general, that underworld is a area where you have to start tapping information from, and tell us what your experience is and getting information from those types of people.
Well, look at what we're dealing with in terms of, let's say, murder investigations. Very seldom is it a random act. It's usually people that know each other. A lot of times they are involved in the drug world, doing illegal activities. So we don't have the most outstanding witnesses from the beginning, but we have to rely on them. Just because they may be a druggie, may be involved in selling drugs, using drugs, doesn't mean that we don't take into consideration what they have to say. As a homicide investigator, you have to be open to everything, every bit of information that comes in. Not only that, whatever information comes in is discoverable to the defense attorney. So you can't pick and choose who your witnesses are or the information that they supply. Now, when they give you a name of somebody, Johnny Jones, do we run out and lock Johnny Jones up and say, aha, we got you because Billy Brown said that you committed this murder? No, we don't. We take the information that they give us and we vet it out. We're not going to make an arrest solely on the information that this informant, whether it is a upstanding citizen of the community or whether it is a drug dealer, a drug user, a convicted felon. We have to go out and we have to corroborate what it is that they say. Otherwise, it's just hearsay. We can't just go out and arrest this person or persons that they may have given us just on face value on what they said. Always keeping in mind later on down the road what's going to happen when it goes to court. So we're always looking further down, a year, 2 years down, with this witness that we have about their credibility and what did we do as detectives to corroborate what it is that they told us.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems we're having with this is that we do have an eyewitness who gave a really detailed testimony about what he saw and what he said he saw. And we had experts analyze his voice for deception. And she also agreed that she believed he was telling the truth. And all of the law enforcement in that area that Paula has been dealing with have completely dismissed him. And we're just not understanding why. And they just keep saying it's because he's a druggie. And we're like, but they're all druggies. So if you're going to dismiss everybody, how are we ever going to get an answer here?
And to be clear, also, the guy, after he had admitted all this stuff numerous times and to law enforcement, when we made it public, he started walking it back and said he made the whole thing up. But the level of details, and then we since then found out that he was told this by someone else. So, and that's been kind of a reoccurring theme in this case. There was another person that came out who said that they were put under a gun to bury the bodies. And he was working with the U.S. Marshals. And the day that he was bringing him out to show where that was, as soon as he got close to it, he got spooked about something. And then he started walking back and recanting that. So if you can kind of speak to a little bit about that as well in regards to having unreliable witnesses and people, but you still have to work them.
You do have to work them. But the police, the detectives, the investigators, they're not going to tell the general public what it is that they have in the case or what it is that they don't have in the case. In terms of information that they gather during their investigation, there are things that are not let out to the public for the purpose of verifying the truthfulness of a witness that comes forward. When you have a witness, whether it's someone in the underworld, the drugs with a soiled past, or you have, John Q. Citizen, once they start retracting what they said, that's going to be an issue down the road. The defense attorneys are going to jump all over that. So you have to do everything you can to verify and to corroborate their story. When they start backtracking, that's an issue that's going to come up later on down during a trial. Do you dismiss it? No. Again, you do what you have to do to corroborate what it is that they said. And if you find out that what they gave you was information that nobody else knew, well, then you know that witness more than likely was an eyewitness. A lot of times you get witnesses, though, that will tell one story, and then when the detectives go and the investigators go and they talk to that person, you find out that it really was just hearsay that they heard, that they didn't have firsthand knowledge of that. Then again, you get witnesses that give you information that wasn't released out to the public, and the only way that person could have known that it was there was because they themselves were present and were an eyewitness to this. But now they're retracting their statement. Well, why are they doing this? Are they being threatened? Did somebody pay them a visit? Could it just be that they're fearful and they are now thinking, I don't really want to be involved in this? So there's a whole host of reasons why someone would recant what they had previously said. But again, you as an investigator try and corroborate their story as best as you can. And the facts are always going to be the facts. If this person had intimate information that was uncovered at a crime scene that nobody would know unless they were an eyewitness to this, well, then you got to dig down into why are you recanting? Have you been threatened? What's the problem here? So there's recanting the story of a witness. A witness recanting their story could be because they weren't an eyewitness, or it could be because they were an eyewitness. Now they're fearful of their life, or it could have been that they were threatened in some manner.
Yeah, and I think that's been the case with this case with Molly and Colt, that a lot of witnesses, because we've gotten a lot of tips since we started the podcast, and before, people have reached out to Paula, who's the cousin of Molly. People are visibly scared, and you can hear that in their voices, because the people who perpetrated this crime are still out there. No one has ever been caught. So, and it's a small town. It's a small area. Everybody knows everybody. So how do you combat something like that as an investigator? How do you
when it's in a small area, like you said, everybody knows everybody and everyone knows everybody's business. One of the things that, I always said to the family is, listen, you're probably going to hear something before I do. And whatever you hear, I would like to know, and I would like to know who you heard it from. And then we go and we talk to that person and we see where they got their information from. We see if their information is valid, if they had any part in this, or if they have a friend or a relative that had any part in this. So it's always critical to let the family know that you're going to rely on them, because in a lot of instances, they're going to hear things. People are going to tell them things before they tell the investigators. That's just the normal part of life and an investigation. People want to be helpful, more so to the family than to the police. I wish it wasn't that way, but it is. And they will be willing to tell the family things. And they would tell the family, I'm not going to talk to the police, but this is what I know, or this is what I heard. And again, if you hear something, it's hearsay, but we would still like to know, who did that person hear it from? And then we can backtrack from there.
What would you do in a situation where we just described, where you had a witness who said he saw something and gave you intimate details and also told law enforcement, two different law enforcement entities, a similar story, and then later on started to walk it back and said they made it all up and that they were just saying that to hopefully help? And he did basically said he was trying to help the family.
Right.
So how would you handle a situation like that with your detectives if someone had come out? And I'm sure something like that has happened to you in the past.
Well, yeah, it does. I mean, you have to continue to go back to that witness. Obviously, there's some reason. If they have intimate knowledge about what happened, they were either an eyewitness there or they got it from the person that was there, a person that was there, or even the person that committed that crime. The fact that they have intimate knowledge that the general public wouldn't know, you would just have to keep going back there, and hopefully that person has a conscience and will finally tell you what it is they know and how they know it, whether they were there or whether they weren't. Problem is, if they hold fast on their talk of, hey, I didn't see anything, and I was making it up, or this or that, there's really nothing you can do. I mean, you can't really badger them. What are you going to do if you don't have their cooperation? It's going to create a problem in the investigation. But you're certainly going to go back to them as many times as you can until there is a definitive, hey, I made it up and I'm not talking to you anymore. So you're going to have to try and exhaust all of the avenues available to you. Sometimes it's that particular investigator talking to the person just doesn't hit it off with them, in which case I would ask somebody else to go and talk to them, maybe another male detective or another female detective. Sometimes people just don't hit it off in interviews, and they're not going to be willing to talk to that one investigator no matter what. Certainly give another investigator the opportunity to go and talk to that person and see if they can find some kind of common ground, and maybe that person feels a little more comfortable with that person and will open up to them. In a small department, those people in that small community probably have prior interactions, and some of them may have been good, some of them may have been bad. But as an investigator, if it wasn't working with me, I would ask somebody else to go and talk to them.
Yeah. And so you're a firm believer in re-interviewing people.
Absolutely.
That's what I thought. Yeah, because we've been getting a lot of interesting theories from some law enforcement where they don't re-interview people. A druggie's statement's not going to hold up in court, so why bother? That's been kind of frustrating.
Very frustrating. And also Khan, the guy that was driving the car on the night that they disappeared, his sister went and filed a police report, and she stated in that report that he had told her that he was going to go to jail for killing somebody. And they completely dismissed that statement. They were like, well,
Right.
She was just upset with him. She just wrote that. She didn't mean it. It was very bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of whether he was involved or not, whether or not he felt like he was going to get pinned for that, to make a statement like that to his sister connotes the fact that he probably knows more than what he's saying.
Absolutely. I mean, I would, in a case like that, you would definitely have to go back to her, talk to her, break down what it is that she's saying. A lot of times you just got to slow the process down. In these investigations, especially the first few hours, everything is happening fast paced. We as investigators have the luxury of slowing everything down. That's what we do. We can look at it with a better eye when you slow everything down. A lot of times, certainly in the case with child deaths, there are times when everything is fast-paced and you just need to take a step back and slow everything down. She certainly sounds like somebody that needs to be re-interviewed about what she was told. They should really go back and talk to her again.
Yeah, and they may have, we don't know. I mean, that part of the stuff, I mean, there's a lot we don't know.
Absolutely. They're not going to tell you every part of their investigation. It would be irresponsible of them to put that stuff out there. Again, you want to judge the credibility of the person that you have. It's give and take thing when you arrest the suspect in this, because you want to also check their credibility with you in the story that they're telling you. There's three sides to every story, as they always say, his side, her side, and the truth. You want to make sure in an investigation early on that you don't put certain things out there that only the perpetrator of this crime would know. If you put that stuff out there, then how do you gauge a suspect when you have them in the room, whether they're telling you the truth? It's as simple as if you have a stabbing victim and you have somebody that comes in and says, yeah, I shot him. well, then that's just not there and stuff. That's not the case. So you don't want to put out intimate details of the case to the public, and you also want to have the public out there to help you. So the investigator isn't going to tell you everything. They very well may have interviewed this person again and found that they weren't credible. I mean, I don't know what their investigation is. There's a good chance that they did interview them, and the information that you had learned or the information that this person had said just isn't so. And again, they're not going to put that out there to the general public or to you guys and tell you what it is that they have. They will just tell you, well, no, we interviewed that person and we don't find them credible.
The problem with this case is it wasn't handled like a homicide investigation from the beginning. It was started off with a car chase, as you know, and then the people disappeared after that. There were some cell phone records saying that they were one of the young woman, Molly, was alive until the next morning, so they could track via cell phone in these rural areas. But they were told by the sheriff at the time, who now is not there because he was taken down out of office because of some corruption and stuff that he was dealing, and which was brought to light because of the investigation. But there really wasn't a proper investigation from the get-go, because he was saying that he told the press that they were runaways. So there was no reason to look for them and then they'll come back. So the investigation was stalled from the beginning. There wasn't any kind of real investigation happening until like a year later. And Paula was the one who started doing some of the searches just for their remains on the property where they were last seen. But how do you backtrack when you have something like that? Or how do you do an investigation where you kind of have to reverse engineer it? Say you were brought in from the outside and you had to reinvestigate this case that really kind of wasn't handled properly in the beginning because of all the people that were involved, and the sheriff was related to the guy who was driving the chase car. How do you do that?
That's in itself is difficult because you're already starting behind the power curve there. It's always best if you can get on at the very beginning of an investigation as opposed to coming in there later on. A lot of times you have a missing persons case, and a lot of police departments have a missing person section, and that missing person section will get the call as a missing person from a loved one calling in that they're missing. The missing person squad will start their investigation. Later on down the line, when it becomes apparent that maybe this person isn't missing, maybe it's a matter of foul play, they would notify the detectives if they have a homicide section, or a lot of police departments don't have that luxury of a dedicated homicide section like the Suffolk County Police does, and it would be to an investigator in that department. So he's already starting out behind because let's just say, it could be a year later before the missing person people say, hey, we're not getting anywhere with this, or this is what we've learned and we think that this person may have met with foul play. There's a loss of things like phone records, cell sites, information like that. So it's always best to get on, but it's difficult. The case has been going on for a year, and now you're trying to play catch up to what has been done, what was learned, where are we at in this investigation. So it's difficult for any investigator to come on late into an investigation just because of the time frame. You lose so many different opportunities as time passes, and you can only hope that certain things are preserved. As far as Molly's phone being in certain areas the next day, just understand that that is the device. It's not necessarily to say that she had control of that device at that time. The perpetrator of the crime could have had control of it and had the phone on. So it's not always just because you have that phone record or that cell site location. Sometimes it's the device and it's with somebody other than the victim, especially if the victim was found to have met with foul play and this person took that device, maybe clothes and stuff, and was getting rid of it somewhere. But it'll give you a general area of where that device was, probably a pretty good place for an investigator getting on late in the game to start looking what's in that area, what's common to the missing person, what's common to potential suspects in that area.
Yeah, we agree with you. I mean, we don't really know. We know that she spoke to someone following morning, right?
Yes.
But that's about it. After that, there's not a whole lot of information. And we do know that both Molly and Colt's phone went dead the same day, I think within like 20 minutes of each
Yeah, it was
other.
like after 10 a.m.
Yeah, like within 20 minutes of each other. But, that's the problem. There's so much, everything's very cloudy in this investigation. We have so much information, so many tips. She's been dealing with this for about 9.5 years now. And
Right.
in the beginning, she fully cooperated with even the law enforcement agency that was thwarting the investigation, the Love County with Joe, and she would hand over information right away. Anything that someone would tell her, she would hand to him. She wasn't doing anything about it or anything. She was like, "Here, I got this. Someone just gave my PI a gun and a machete, and here, take this." And wait, someone has got a gun. We found some bones. Here are the bones. Do you want the bones? There was a lot of where she was participating and working with law enforcement because people felt comfortable coming to her because she had started a Facebook page and had basically just to kind of create a place where people can kind of exchange information, and if they were afraid to come out, they could come out anonymously. So it's been frustrating for her, and then when we started looking into the case, it was frustrating for us to find out that there was a lot of missed opportunities, and a lot of them, they chalk them up, well, that was information from a druggie. And when it comes down to when the person or persons who've committed these horrible murders to Molly and Colt finally get caught, it's going to come down to the testimony of someone probably who's either a druggie or has had a drug problem, who has rolled in that community, and that's going to be the person that's going to be talking and telling information. So how do you reconcile that?
Again, just because they are a druggie or have a soiled past doesn't mean that what they're telling you isn't true or relevant to the case. You just have to be able to corroborate what it is that they are saying. That's really what it comes down to. Look, most of the people that we deal with are honor students. And I mean by that, yes, Your Honor, and no, Your Honor. They've all had a past. That's who we deal with. In a perfect world, you have perfect witnesses and they show up on time. Our biggest problem sometimes is our witnesses. You get a statement from them. And when you take a statement, you're taking that statement to lock them into what it is that they said. You try and corroborate what they have given you, and then you want to get them on paper and you want to lock them into what they said. So they can't recant it. There are also times when during your investigation, you take a statement from somebody and you get more information and you go back to them and you say to them, "Hey, is there anything that you forgot to tell me? What about this?" And they say, "Yeah, I don't want to say anything at that time, but yes, that's true." You tell them what it is that you learned. You take another statement from them. Is it going to show that person wasn't 100% truthful with you when you first spoke to them or when you took that statement? Yeah, it is, but that's just the nature of the beast. That's something that we're going to have to live with as an investigator. And you're not looking to hide anything like that. That's why you're taking another statement to put on there. "Hey, on such and such a date, I spoke to this investigator and I told him this. I didn't tell him everything." You would add that in there and stuff. So the case is always evolving. I mean, you'll learn things sometimes after taking a statement. And again, you'll have to go back and take another statement, but that's just something that you're going to have to live with down the road. Or you're going to get beat up on it by the defense, more than likely, but you don't hide it and you put it out there. And especially here in New York with all the discovery rules that we have, I mean, we have to turn everything over. A lot of states are like that. It's just the nature of the beast. It's just something that you have to live with.
With some of the podcasts that you've listened to, can you give us any kind of thoughts from a homicide investigator's perspective? What do you think about this case as a homicide detective?
I think it's difficult because of the issues that you had in the beginning. Information wasn't, to me, from what I saw, wasn't really being exchanged. Seems like certain things were discounted, but I'm not really certain on whose end that was, whether it was from the sheriff there, who's no longer the sheriff. There's certainly family is involved there. I think that it would probably be a good thing to check the property. But again, you have to have probable cause to do that unless that family is going to consent to a search of the area, and it sounds like they're not doing that. They're not going to cooperate in that manner. So that would kind of, give you reason to pause and wonder, okay, well, why aren't they doing that? Is it their right to say, no, I don't want you to do it? Yes, it is. Absent having any probable cause to get a warrant to do it, you're pretty much at the mercy of that family and stuff. So I think people that get met with foul play and stuff, is it unheard of to drive the bodies away? No, it happens all the time. Certainly in serial killer cases, they commit the murder in one area, they dump the bodies in another area. Is it something that was in the heat of the moment where an argument ensued, it got too far and somebody died? People panicked, and then Molly was a witness, so she had to be dealt with. Are they going to go transporting the bodies there? No, they're probably going to, where the crime was committed, somewhere close by, they will probably keep the bodies there because they don't want a chance being caught driving around and having a dead body or two dead bodies in the car, especially in a small town, rural area. Everybody knows everybody. The local guy sees somebody going by early in the morning and decides to stop them. So they're not going to take that chance. I think probably there's still some clues in the area where it was suspected to have happened, somewhere close by there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, we agree.
Yeah,
we agree
think
with that.
so too.
I mean, we've had stories where they were dumped in a lake, and Paula went and searched the lake, and which was like about an hour and a half away. And
Right.
there's oil wells where people said they might be down, which are very close by
Right.
where the chase stopped in that area on that Long Hollow Road in Oswald, which is a very small area. That's the thing about this crime, is that we kind of know where the crime scene is.
Right.
And it's been so difficult. I think the Nips property was initially searched, did a cursory search like a year afterwards, but
Right.
not like a in-depth search, like a full forensic search. Nothing has really been done that way. I mean, even when they found the Battle Springs Ranch, which is adjacent to some of the properties that where all this stuff happened, there was a pond and there was human remains. They had dog hits down there for cadaver dog hits multiple times, and they drained the pond but unfortunately they're not forensic people. They're not CSI techs. They didn't want to go any further because they didn't want to screw up the evidence. So that's
Right.
like another, but it still hits. The dogs are still hitting there. That needs to be searched. There's still a lot of places that need to be searched, and a lot of the searches have been done independently. Some of them have been, I know law enforcement's doing some on their own to vet out some of these rumors that have been put out on the internet. It's just difficult because it seems like we're always a day late and dollar short on this investigation.
Right.
It's always
Well,
pushing
don't forget, you had a late start on it, so that's just something to be expected and stuff. But eventually, the facts catch up. You come up to speed on what is going on. Sometimes it just takes a lucky break. You may have somebody that heard something from somebody, or you may have somebody that suddenly has a conscience and was there and decides to come forward. You're always constantly reevaluating the information that comes in. And sometimes in law enforcement, you have to let out a little bit more than when you come to a stalemate. Maybe put something out there that you normally wouldn't do just to keep the interest going, or you may get somebody that says, hey, on such and such a night, I saw this. The fact that there were delays in the beginning with the information is problematic, and it's going to be problematic throughout the case until the facts catch up to what's actually going on.
Yeah. Quick question for you. Initially,
Sure.
when some of the people that were actually involved in the car chase and involved in that, Con and this other guy named Colby, and they lawyered up immediately. What does that say to you? I'm not a homicide detective. I don't know what that means. What does that say to a homicide detective when you're investigating a crime where you have a person of interest and they immediately lawyer up? What does that say to you?
To the courts, you can't make any kind of inference from that because they're just trying to utilizing that constitutional right. As a homicide detective, it sets up a red flag to me, because if you aren't involved, why wouldn't you talk to the police if you have nothing to hide? So there's a fine line. I mean, they have a constitutional right to exercise that right not to speak to you, but also think about it. If you didn't have anything involved in a crime and a police officer asked you a question, you would certainly answer that question, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Especially if it was involving a capital murder.
Exactly.
Why would you want to be involved in something like that or associated with that?
Exactly.
And,
Yeah,
we're getting conflicting reports on whether or not they said anything to the law enforcement with the lawyers present. And so we don't know. We don't know, but it just seems kind of, again, just as a layman and non-law enforcement person, but we've been around a lot of them for our entire career. They all said the same thing. They said that's a red flag.
Yeah, it's definitely a red flag, but it's not to say that that attorney who placed those investigators on notice didn't call back at a later time after interviewing his client further and said, hey, I think you should talk to the cops. We can arrange a sit down. There are times when, that very lawyer that puts you on notice says, hey, we'd like to sit down and talk to you about this. And the lawyer would be present and the prosecutor would be present and you would sit down there and listen to them. I don't know that that's the case. If it was, I certainly don't know that the investigators would share that with the public. It's not also out of the realm of possibility that maybe they did talk to this person even after they lawyered up with their attorney present. So, but that's not something that they would normally tell you.
It's fascinating on how this thing has evolved and twisted and turned and how everybody knows everybody. Some people are related to each other, and we have a lot of information. We have a lot of information, but we really don't have any answers yet. And it's been very frustrating for the family and of the victims, and it's confusing because everyone there that lives in that area, it seems like they know what happened through the grapevine. It's a small community, but now it's become, because it's coming up on a decade, it's become almost like a myth, and that the facts are getting more diluted, and they're getting mixed up with rumor, and they're getting mixed up with people saying, oh, I saw this, and then telling it to the police and also FBI, and then they're like, well, I just made it up. Why would you make up something? Why would you insert yourself into a double homicide investigation if you just made it up?
Well, there are people that are like that in this world. I can't answer why, but there are people that will insert themselves into an investigation for whatever reason. It's beyond me, but they come forward sometimes with some of the craziest things. As far as the information that the family gets, understand something here. The investigator, the homicide detectives, the investigators that are working on their case, their main concern is the victim, and it is justice for that victim. They're not going to share everything with the family. They're certainly not going to share everything with the public because it could jeopardize the investigation. Again, they're not going to give information that's not out there to the public because that's what they're going to use when they're in the room interviewing that person to find out their truthfulness and to corroborate what it is that they're saying. Our main concern is getting justice for that victim.
Because this case is a little bit unique because it was kind of operating in the reverse, because it was Paula's investigation which was yielding information that she was feeding the law enforcement, specifically the OSBI. And then they would take the information and vet it out, but then there would be no follow-up with Paula. Sometimes there would be, sometimes there wouldn't be, but it just didn't seem like they were actively investigating it. They were passively waiting for Paula to give her information, and then they would react to it. And whether or not that's the way it went, but we're at 9.5 years now, and nothing really, for a long period of time, there was no information being exchanged, nothing being done in this case, until we did a television documentary. And that kind of, as well as some other outlets have done them too, just to kind of, wasn't just us, there was a bunch of other people that have aired this case, and also podcasts. There's been a litany of information on this case. But it wasn't until we started up this podcast that it kind of got reignited to where the community is listening to this, and it's yielding and eliciting people to come forward, regardless of whether or not these tips are valid or not. They're worth listening to. These people are scared when they're telling us these tips. I don't know. I mean, does that, as an investigator, when someone comes to you with information and they're fearing for their life or their family's life, how do you handle that? And how do you gauge that type of information versus someone just dropping a tip just unemotionally?
You have to look at why is that person coming forward to you with this information. You have to listen to the concerns that they have for their safety and why is it that they feel that way. You also have to look at the 10-year-old case. Why are you coming forward now? Where were you when this happened 10 years ago? Why didn't you come forward with that? It's difficult. Just because you don't hear from the police doesn't mean that they're not doing anything on the case.
No, I get that.
And that's a big thing. And, you get that a lot of times with victims' families. I haven't heard from you. Well, you haven't heard from me because I have nothing further to give you at this point. You haven't heard from me because I've been working on the case, and what I have, I can't share with you. You can be brutally honest with the family and say, look, we've got leads, we're developing stuff. There's nothing I can share with you, but just be patient. There are times when there's information that you can give them. Again, these investigators, just because you don't see them doing anything doesn't mean that nothing is getting done. They're just not going to share everything with you. And if there are some things that are brought forward and you deliver it to the police, ask them, listen, are we going to hear something from this? They'll probably tell you no. We'll take what you have and we will run it down. You may get somebody that, does that and finds out that the information that you had just wasn't valid. And they may say, yeah, we looked into that. It's not valid because of this.
So that's appropriate. That's appropriate if, say, Paula gave them a tip on something and they vetted it out and
Sure.
then it came to nothing. It's appropriate for the law enforcement entity to say, hey, listen, we did check it out. It came out, nothing came with it. It just didn't pan out. That's appropriate.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I just wanted to kind of get some guidelines here as far as what the appropriate thing is.
Yeah, I mean, look, every investigator is different. Every department is different. They all have their own policies and their protocols, but certainly if someone gives you a tip, you vet it out and it goes nowhere, is going to be detrimental to the case to tell that person, hey, we ran down what you told us, and that's just not the case because of X, Y, and Z. Again, it's all up to the individual investigator. It's up to his supervisors. The guy whose name is on the case is the guy that's going to sit on the stand and answer all the questions, but he still has a supervisor, and that supervisor has a supervisor that they have to answer to. You may get an investigator that shares that, look, that tip you gave us was no good, here's why. And then you may get somebody that doesn't bother to communicate that to you because of either their policy or they're just not that type of investigator. They're not going to give that information up.
Have you ever had a case in your career where you had multiple law enforcement agencies all working on the same case? Like this one, I mean, when it started in Love County. Then you also had the Oklahoma Highway Patrol that was involved. You had Carter County, which is close by. You had a couple local municipalities. And then on top of that, after a while, you had OSBI come in, and then you had FBI come in, and then you also had the U.S. Marshals involved as well. Have you ever had a case that had that much, and it didn't seem like they were all coordinating either. It didn't seem like they were working together. They were all working separately. Can you speak to that as far as the culture of an investigation with multiple law enforcement agencies?
Sure. It happens more often than you would think, but the one key rule here is whose case is it and who's going to be in charge of prosecuting it, whether it is a county case, whether it is a state case, or whether it is a case that the feds are going to come in on. There has to be a lead agency. And usually that is the agency whose, the investigator's name is on that case, and that's going to be the guy that's going to go up on the stand. There are times when the feds get involved and then the feds take over the case. It may start out in a county, and then there may be other facets of that crime where, the feds will come in and take it. The I will assume responsibility for the case. But at that point, you're handing that case over to them. And then you're pretty much out of it unless they have some questions later on down the line. So it happens fairly often, but you always have to go back to, well, whose name is on the case and who is prosecuting the case? If it's the county case, then that detective is and should maintain the integrity of the case and control of that case. And if not, then hand it off to the next agency that's doing it, and they'll be responsible for it. But yeah, there are cases where you have a multitude of agencies involved. Here in Suffolk County, out on the east end, there are town police departments. When there are murder investigations out there, the Suffolk County Police Department handles those murders. Those outside agencies, the town police departments, in all my dealings with them, have been very good. They realize that we are the investigating agency, and whatever they need, they make available. And we've had a pretty good success rate with that. We're not stepping on anybody's feet. They're the local agency. They're going to hear information before we do. They pass that information on. We vet it out. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. In terms of Long Island, there's a lot of Suffolk County, a lot of gang-related issues. We have a very good working relationship with the Eastern District, the U.S. Attorney's Office. They do a fantastic job. They may have other crimes that ours tie into. They may be up on wires. They may have cooperators. They may, although we may be the ones that initially respond to the scene and do a workup of the scene and continue our investigation, at some point it becomes apparent that, hey, this stuff is all intertwined, and, you would get them to take over the case, at which point then you take a back seat to that and you continue to forward information that you get to them. So it's a working relationship.
Ideally, you all should be exchanging information, correct?
Yes. All the working Indians get along fine. We all, look.
But does that actually, in actuality, does that always happen?
Does it always happen? No. You would like to think that it does, but does it always happen? No.
And why doesn't it happen always?
I wish I could answer that. I'd probably solve a lot of investigators' problems. We don't know.
Is it the human factor? Just because people are
more or less
people are different, and people we're dealing with agendas, egos, and proprietary investigation information that they don't want to share, or would they only share what they feel like it's relevant to share?
They're only going to give you what it is they want to give you.
The reason I say this is because when the Love County Sheriff was brought into like a grand jury hearing, and they were looking at some of the things that he was doing, some felonies he was accused of doing, which he got smashed down to misdemeanors, and he didn't do any jail time or anything like that. But it was part of an FBI investigation, who also got information based upon the Molly and Colt stuff too, from witnesses that they've interviewed. After that kind of resolved and the sheriff was just asked to step down, the FBI agent in charge of that pulled Paula aside and said to her, I don't know if he pulled her aside or called her later, said, there's information in these files that you need to see, so do a FOIA request. That to me seems that there was something that he found that was relevant to Molly and Colt. And he was trying to, his case against Joe he was trying to make the case that Joe knew something about this. That's what the court transcripts, we read them on the podcast, and that's what it was leading to. Why would someone like that say that to a victim's family if they didn't feel that what was in their files was going to help their case?
Obviously, he is case detective on it.
Yeah, he was the local agent assigned to it.
Well, look, if he said that, he's got a reason to say that, and it's probably good advice. He should probably heed that advice and do that FOIL request. Although,
well, she has, and it got turned down a couple times, and we
it's going to get turned down because it's an active investigation. I always say a lie by omission is still a lie. If you're omitting something, even between agencies, why are you omitting that if we're all working together? Put it all out there. If this is what you've uncovered, put it out there. It sounds like there is something that he has knowledge of, and he was trying to pass on some information. Again, the FOIL request was put in there. It's going to get denied because it's an active investigation. Just makes you pause as to, well, why would he say that? So I really can't answer that question.
No, I know. I'm just getting perspective.
But there are a lot of times when you would think that information is flowing freely, but investigators as a whole, we are in the information business. We're in the getting information more than giving information. Sometimes you get people that share more things with their case than others. I really can't answer if that investigator is telling you that you should be doing a FOIL request, then there's obviously something there that he thinks the family should know that they don't know.
Yeah, no, we agree too. It's just there's so many problems with this investigation, and unfortunately we don't know how to kind of reconcile a lot of this and resolve it. Our job is just to kind of keep the case out there, so at least people will continue to maybe come forward and they find, because if we have something that's legitimate, because we get a lot of crazy stuff too, just like the law enforcement do. I mean, there's a lot of tips that people have reached out to us that we realize that it's probably not true. So we don't put it out there, but when we feel like it's information that should be put out there to kind of help at least allow people to know that there's a safe space for them to come to maybe connect them with law enforcement, say, listen, if there's something really hot and something that we feel it's relevant, we're talking to law enforcement. So it's not like we're not talking to them. So, last thing we want to do is obstruct anything in this investigation. But at the same point,
sure,
it's a very high profile case in that area. It's an unsolved double homicide for almost 10 years.
Right.
It's worth talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like it's worth talking about.
Have you ever worked with press in the past in the media to help get information out there that you feel that would help get?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. On anniversaries of a death, if we don't have anything, there have been times when we've put information out there that we're looking for the public's help. That's certainly a tool of law enforcement, and sometimes it is fruitful and sometimes it's not.
How about like Crime Stoppers? What do you think about that?
We use Crime Stoppers, sure. Absolutely. Crime Stoppers is a great program out here in Suffolk County. They do a great job. Later on down the line, court may come up that a witness came forward because they got a reward from Crime Stoppers. That's something you'll have to deal with later on. But no, certainly Crime Stoppers is a valuable tool to law enforcement. The tips remain anonymous and you work them from there. But you should always utilize, as an investigator, whatever it is that you can. And there are times when it's beneficial to put it out on Crime Stoppers and see if it generates any more interest.
Yeah. I mean, how do you, as a homicide investigator, deal with cases that are, I mean, obviously the Gilgo Beach murder cases is a very high profile case that is still unsolved. How do you reconcile your feelings and your motivations to work a case like that that has information, but not enough to find who did it?
You keep going back and going over everything that has been gone over before. There are no new leads that are coming in there. The motivation that you have with that is when you talk to these family members. Family members you're always working for the victim, but these family members, they're there speaking for the victim. Keeping them in mind, you always want to do the best that you can for that victim and for that family to bring them some type of closure. And the case, sometimes new information comes in and you're able to make an arrest. That's always the end goal of any investigator, is to get justice for that victim.
Yeah. Any kind of final thoughts about the Molly and Colt case that you've noticed, having listened to the podcast, that kind of sticks out to you, and direction that you think they should go in, or how do you think they're going to be able to solve this case?
Certainly the last area where they were said to be, if that area could be searched more thoroughly, you can certainly go back and look at imaging, Google images, throughout the years and stuff. Sometimes you get lucky that way. Certainly a review of the phone records, re-interview people, talk to everyone that has come up in the case, and go back again and talk. And again, don't dismiss anyone that you have because of their past, because again, everyone is an honor student, and it's usually yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor.
Yeah.
So we don't have the best witnesses all the time, but that's
everybody we've checked out, pretty much everybody's names who are associated with the case that we've checked out, they've got histories with law enforcement. They have either felonies
again, just because they have that history doesn't mean that their information isn't valid. So I wish them luck. Sounds like they have their work cut out for them. It's a 10-year-old case. That in and of itself creates problems, but it's not a case that can't be solved. And again, just because you don't hear from them doesn't mean that nothing is being done on the case.
Yeah, no, we understand that. We understand they have to keep everything close to the vest. Great. Well, listen, Pat, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you. It was nice to meet you too.
And you kind of enlightened us on a bunch of stuff. We've heard before, but you confirmed a lot of the other stuff, and we appreciate your expertise. And hopefully we can come back to you and ask you some other questions.
Sure. And wish those investigators good luck with the case.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
The fact that she was able to go into such specific detail about absolutely everything from start to finish pertaining to what she saw, what she heard, even to what she smelt at certain times was very, very graphic.
If you or anyone you know is suffering from a methamphetamine addiction, please contact the American Meth Addiction Hotline.
If you or anyone you know has been the victim of sexual abuse, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
For any tips relating to the disappearance of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes, please contact 833-4-MOLLY and Colt, and they will be directed to the proper law enforcement agency.
All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content. Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and listen to Vi's original song, Take Me Back, written for Molly Miller.